Good morning, everyone. Welcome if you're just joining us for day 4 of the Bocas Lit Fest. As you know, our theme is always coming home. And boy, do we have a powerhouse panel for you this morning. Today, Alexis Pauline Gumbs, the chair of the 2025 OCM Bocas Prize for Poetry's judging panel, alongside Kevin Adonis Browne, himself the 2019 winner of the OCM Bocas Prize, will be in conversation with Rinaldo Walcott, chair of the 2025 OCM Bocas Prize nonfiction panel of judges. Please give them a round of applause. A special thank you to those joining us via live stream. Thank you for tuning into the Bocas Lit Fest wherever you are in the world. We know this is going to be intense, rich, and generative conversation. Please enjoy it.
I think, good morning. Good morning. Yes. Let me say what a pleasure it is to be here at Bocas, to be, as I intimated last night, to be, oh, you can't, can you hear me better now? Okay, so let me begin again. Let me say what a pleasure it is to be here at Bocas, as I intimated last night, to be called home. Home is a wonderful place to be, but home can also be a certain kind of discomfort. So, but nonetheless, there's pleasure in discomfort. What I want to do, first I want to say that Kevin and Alexis's books have a great resonance. These two books have a great resonance in a range of ways, and I hope that the conversation that we will have will draw out some of that resonance. The first thing I would like to do is to invite Alexis to read, followed by Kevin, and then we'll try to make some moves.
Good morning. Really wonderful to be with you all. So would you take 3 breaths with me? Maybe do what supports your breathing. It might mean put down what you're holding. It might mean uncross your legs, recross your legs, whatever it is that supports you. And I'm gonna say inhaling when I'm inhaling, and I'm gonna say exhaling when I'm exhaling. You ready? Inhaling. Exhaling. Inhaling, exhaling. One more time, inhaling. Maybe big, loud exhale. We're here, we're awake, you made it. And I'm so excited to be in this conversation on survival and arrival. I wanted to really ground us in Audre Lorde's intervention into the idea of survival. This is Survival as a Promise, the eternal life of Audre Lorde. I'm so proud of it. And so each of the 10 sections of this book that organize the 58 chapters of this book really offer a definition of survival. So I wanted to offer them to us in an oracle fashion, okay? You all know about oracle, but I'll just reorient you. So the oracle requires our presence and our breathing. So we did that, yes. The oracle requires our inquiry and our curiosity. And the oracle requires our groundedness in our existence beyond the individual. So I want to ask you to dedicate your participation to someone who's not in this old firehouse with us, maybe not even on the live stream that you know of, but who is a part of why you showed up for this. Maybe why you showed up for this whole festival, maybe why you showed up for this particular conversation. And we're gonna say their names out loud. I'm dedicating, as an example, my participation to my mother, Pauline Mackenzie. It is Mother's Day in the US, and she is with my grandmother, Joyce Mackenzie, who remembers her great-grandmother and is a great-grandmother, so she holds our 7 generations, and I'm bringing that energy into the space. So you can dedicate to someone who's older than you, someone who's younger than you, someone who's living now, someone who's an ancestor, someone of any species. But we're gonna name that being in the way we can name them on the count of 3. So choose one. I know multitudes arrived with you. But the rigor in the exercise is to focus that energy. Maybe someone you want to send the good energy of this space to. Maybe someone you want to receive supportive energy from. Are you ready? Okay, we're going to say their names out loud. Let's practice. Say your own name out loud. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so louder than that, okay? Okay. Okay, so we're going to say our dedications on after 3. 1, 2, 3. Pauline Mackenzie. Thank you. Thank you for bringing your folks. And all oracles require a form of randomization. So will you choose a number between 1 and 10? It can be any number. It could be your favorite number. It could be a sacred number to you. It could be the number of decades you've been on Earth, whatever it is. It could just be the number that comes to you in this moment. And with that number, you're divining also your question in relationship to your own survival, like what you face after you leave this room, maybe what you face after you leave this festival. That question that's there for you in your life right now, it might be in relationship to family, relationship, work, your relationship to yourself, your spirituality. Just find it and associate it with a number between 1 and 10. Just do it real fast. Trust your intuition. Did you find it? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to offer these definitions of survival in relationship to your number. So who chose number 1? No one chose number 1? Nicholas, you chose number 1. Our first definition of survival from Audre Lorde is survival is the ability to consciously draw one breath after another. Who chose number 2? You all chose 7? No one chose number 2, or are you just scared to tell me? Okay. Good, actually, because definition number 2 comes from Audre Lorde's journal. It says, I had one of those grotesque childhoods that turns a person into a poem. Unfortunately, it's still relatable to you, even though you did not choose number 2. Who chose 3? This is from Audre Lorde's Ballad from Childhood. But what if I dig beneath those things? You're supposed to really take this with you and use it in your life, yes? Yes, okay. Who chose 4? By survival, I do not mean mere existence, which is the province of the walking wounded and the walking dead, but an active quality of living. Who chose 5? I am an anachronism, a sport, an oddity. I am not supposed to exist, but I do. Who chose 6? The decision for survival is not something you make once. You make it over and over again. Who chose 7? I knew it. Although each one of our lives is unalterably our own, and each one of us is ultimately responsible for that life, I sometimes feel as if my survival is a corporate effort. We are, each one of us, intricately woven into the other's existence. Who chose 8? I mean, none of us is going to move the earth 1 millimeter from its axis. But if we do what we need to be doing, then we will leave something that continues beyond ourselves, and that is survival. Who chose 9? It's the longest one. How do we put the lessons learned through our survival into practice in our lives? If every woman who wished for my well-being takes that passion and energy and love into the struggle for clean air, better schools, decent health care, if each one takes it into her daily work for survival and change, then our children's future will be that much more possible. Not guaranteed, but so, so much more assured. And who chose 10? I love the word survival. It always sounds to me like a promise. It makes me wonder sometimes, though, how do I define the shape of my impact upon this earth? Okay, so those are Audre's definitions of survival. Thank you for participating. Do I have 5 more minutes? Okay. And in my second 5 minutes, I am going to read you this excerpt from a chapter called Inheritance Hers. Oh no, it's called Legacy Hers. I changed the title so many times. Yeah. Legacy Hers. Kickham Jenny would be an island by now, if not for what geologists call ancestral collapse. Instead, she is an underwater volcano, falling in on herself again and again, seething underwater between Grenada and Carriacou near a group of rocks called the Sisters. Kickham Jenny erupts every 6 to 10 years. At any moment, she could cause a region-wide tsunami that would leave parts of every island in the Caribbean underwater within 2 hours of her eruption, without warning. All this trouble because unlike her counterparts in the Caribbean volcanic arc, Kickham Jenny has refused to become an island. Her refusal is cinematic, destabilizing. Why won't she cool down? When Audre Lorde traveled to Grenada in 1978, she compared the women she saw to her idea of her mother, Linda. This is the country of my forbearing mothers, the women who define themselves by what they did. The softer edge of African sharpness is upon these women, and they swing, but with a gentleness. It makes Linda even harsher. Those of us who live on islands near active volcanoes must live in a state of readiness or denial or somehow both. Audre thought of her household growing up as a similarly volatile space. What she calls the rigid family structure in that home arranged by my mother existed on top of deep emotional undercurrents that might emerge disruptively at any moment. Sometimes the repressed emotions were erupting out of Audre. It was very unusual for me to cry. My mother had raised us not to. It was, we thought, a sign of weakness, but I couldn't stop, and I wouldn't stop. The idea is to look like any other mountain, hide underwater, and keep the chemistry of your emotions within you. Audre said, from my mother, I learned that you live passionately inside and secret, but you have to be careful because the world's waiting to really knock you down. Audre never accepted the mandate to keep her emotions under the surface. That was why she, quote, courted punishment. I just swam into it. Audre noticed and reacted to those dynamics long before she knew that Linda was actually teaching her about a volcano. She remembers her mother saying magic words she didn't understand, like from hog to Kickham Jenny. What hog? Who's Jenny? She wondered. Most importantly, who's kicking whom? It was only in adulthood that she learned that Hog was the local name for a certain coral reef in the Grenadines, and Kikumjeni was the most active volcano in the Caribbean Sea. The space between was used by her mother to describe, quote, impassable and impossible distances. And what were the words, magic or otherwise, that Audre exchanged with her mother and her sister in the hours before she grabbed her bag and left home for good the summer after high school? We only know their qualities. Hot enough that Linda Belmar threatened to call the police. Projectile enough that they pushed Audre into action. Seismic enough that they changed the shape of their family permanently. Volcanoes are the surface expression of a dynamic process that we, plants and animals, can rarely touch. Right now, underwater robots are sampling Kikumjeni as science's best chance of understanding how Earth becomes Earth. The geologists measure the pressure and heat. The biologists observe the forms of life that are attracted to these particular changes. They use mortars made of agate, a metamorphic rock that forms inside the crevices in volcanoes, to pulverize Kikumjeni's collapse into dust fine enough to study. Audre is in her early 40s, and her mother is in her 70s when Audre tells the press, "My mother was an angelic and maniacal hysteric, fueled by endless furies. And so am I." Past tense becomes present tension. The fossil fuel of rage remains. Like actual fossil fuels, it is ancient, intergenerational. Unlike actual fossil fuels, it is also renewable. Where the earth becomes earth, she is unstable. Kikumjeni is an opening into the uranium isotopes that are living their half-lives beneath us all the time. Chemists call the process of charged uranium isotopes becoming more and more stable a, quote, parent-daughter relationship. Over geological time, as possible uranium becomes actual uranium, the ratio between parent and daughter becomes more and more daughter, until eventually daughter is all there is, and the parent's volatility becomes a memory, a precondition for the daughter's existence as herself. Or, as Audre says, not that I am more powerful than my mother was, but I think that I've been able, through many of the things I got from her, to articulate my power in more ways than she was able to articulate hers. I'll stop there. Thank you.
If I fall off that stage just now there, I would have dead. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you all doing today? Excellent. Mother, I could make you out of iron and make you walk. Eva, my mother. My mother thinks she knows me. Every now and then, and sometimes for no reason at all, she finds a way to tell the story of her decision to start me at school. This, for better or worse, is how she traces the provenance of my accomplishments. The logical outcome of this brand of provenance is a story I've heard many, many times. In this one, I am 3 years old and speaking in full sentences. You sure? I ask. Yes, she would insist. Full sentences in perfect English. I said, you see you, she recalls herself saying, school for you. Down to Teacher Bailey. School Was a Clydesdale private school, a collection of old desks arranged beneath the house belonging to a woman everyone knew as Teacher Bailey. She was a short woman with Douglas hair, more gray than black, with a mole on her face near her nose. This from my mother. I have forgotten her face. I used to think the memory of my being stabbed in the forehead belonged to a genre of memories of children lost or almost lost, that I shared aspects of that fate with my uncle, Collins. But I was no pan man. No child harbored enough of a grievance against me then to almost lose a blade in my heart. A pencil no more a knife to me than a pen was a sword. Origins mattered differently to those who make a mold of their children, a mold of a concept of origin in the shape of a child. I would wonder if I were her son or the prototype of a son, more the result of her tinkering and revisions, her alchemy and artistry. In her repetitions of this phrase, I am, perhaps, the blackness that is at the first and final stages of that alchemy, its discipline, its tenderness, after my refinement has cooled. But she would never tell, saying only what she always says. My mother thinks she has forged me. Moves from tracing my origin to something more akin to techne, moves from locating her sense of my beginnings as an external phenomenon that occurs elsewhere to having the more internalized idea of her son being the manifestation of her own idiosyncratic design, making a son out of iron, and her ingenuity, making him walk. The execution of this design is alchemical. By making something of a human-made miracle, miracle made human, she takes and transcends the role of alchemist, ascending to something of a God made, like her son, in her own image. I would say this is her composition of me as a text, her casting of me as a machine, the suggestion that I was not only a subject to being read, but that I could be predictable, or at least programmable, a model based on her original design, her confidence to say what she knows, what she has done, and could still always do. And from the vantage point of time and space away from her, I encounter an aesthetic of arrival, mine, by looking back. I am what she would call own way. All I could hear, am I good? Yeah. All right. Caveat. It is possible that, however you arrive, you will learn the mystery of true solitude and will never wonder why massing exiles do not think of coming back. Or, through latent heat, you may hardly look with nostalgia toward the gallery and wave, but instead draw yourself inward and train your vision somewhere to the north, past the bordering range, almost fleeing. To arrive properly, you will need to say a few things to yourself. Never mind if they are true or not. Say them anyway. Say that you will not wonder what stays in cast iron pots, their handles pointing like dogs' ears alert to what sounds we, through habit, know so well, but put neatly away for a day that blows a cold too bitter even for coats. Put out of your mind ice pick, sprinkler, yard broom, tree-line cutlass, hoe. How quaint the blue crab looks, how quaint the common fowl. how quaint the songbirds' songs. And remember this: arriving for you must mean that you have already left Pui and Immortel to grow high along slow reclining hills, that you have already left behind with muted fanfare the beaten sun, rain as music you long to hear. The coquier broom with its fork pointed, bound with rough cotton, will point skyward as you must. Your turn in this sun will be different, even if it is not. Your faith will sustain you here, even if it does not. Then, having remembered, you may think of saying in a letter to your mother, "Forgive the nostalgia, but look how things turn, how they will persist." Adjusting grips, hard plastic handles, straps pulled up in shrugs with nervous nods. One yoke is dropped for another. But though we are no longer cast in sharp, powder-starched cotton shirts, gabardine, the instinct to leave, procession slow, is as enduring as sketches of sinew or the savannah to us. I remember you. Intentions stamped and bound in sealed envelopes and bound again in leather are still a type of freedom. For me, as they were for you. Say these things even if they are not true, even as the pride that was once your staying pride retreats to be as indigenous to you as the spear, as native as loincloth and feather, endangered like letters to mothers. Then say, we no longer scale hurried stairs, but rush to find our seats before we are left behind to turn to salt or ash. Ash, you know how it is here. Ash will form if you let yourself think too hard in this heat. I'll see you soon. Love. Memory will drift off, tumbling light like cane trash across the ground, and you will only chase it a few steps before it crumbles. You must hold yourself together so your banded belly will not burst. Soon, the high evening sky, crudely cut, will swirl under this colored argument of tides. A bare sea trembling beneath you. You will guess at what you see, forgetting your geography lessons. Is that Grenada? Nevis? Guadeloupe? Haiti? Is it a wall broken into an archipelago you have never seen? Its mud and stone and water people rolling between them? I will be there with you, standing here with what is left behind, or waiting for you to arrive. You, my people. The you, I hope, will stay with me until, with eyes to word, eyes to image, eyes and ears to sound, together, as if hand in hand, we arrive here. So go ahead and say your departure is complete. Say your arrival is sure. Even if you have not yet arrived, you will. See, you have already begun. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Alexis, and thank you, Kevin. I think we should probably begin at what is kind of like the beginning, which is to say, maybe both of you can reflect on the form that these two books take. Both of you have refused genre in these books in beautiful, resonant, interesting ways. Alexis, in, I'll put it in quotation marks, the biography, the arrival of the natural sciences, so to speak, is for the reader a beautiful intertext that you weave throughout this book in really stunning ways and surprising ways. And maybe you can talk about the decision to refuse a straight autobiography. Of course, Audre Lorde wouldn't demand nothing less. And Kevin, I wonder, in terms of form, if you might also speak to your insistence that this book is not a book of rhetoric, but it is a Caribbean rhetoric. And you're very deliberate in not pluralizing and making it a kind of singular assertion. So let's talk about form.
Okay. Right. Audre Lorde don't know what, no straight biography, no. So Audre Lorde was a person who also queered form. She was someone who wrote a biomythography that was some parts her life story, some parts other people's life story, some part her fantasies about her own life. And when I thought about this ceremony, which is first and foremost just this hope that Audre Lorde can be in your life in something like the way that she's in my life. Like, I see her everywhere. I see her in every element. I'm transformed in what I allow myself to do and be by the presence of this energy that is not containable to one lifetime, but that I accessed through reading the poetry of Audre Lorde. The question is always, what is the ceremony? And that there is a ceremony that could have that possibility live in a different way than it lived before. But at the end of the day, to do that, because it's about the energy of Audre Lorde reaching you where it needs to reach you, which is in this particular moment of your participation in survival, I also just have to follow Audre. And Audre really thought about herself as somebody who came of age in the atomic age, who was born and grew up around the corner from where they invented the atomic bomb, and who had to theorize survival because she was among that first generation of people who understood that they as children were subject to generations that had created a way for the human species to eradicate oxygen-based life on Earth. And so it's a quantum biography. I call it a quantum biography because Audre Lorde had to theorize a nonlinear survival in the circumstances that she was in, and also in her refusal to reproduce systems that said that she couldn't exist as a Black lesbian, feminist, warrior, poet, socialist, mother. Sometimes she would go on to say nearsighted, high maintenance, all the things that she chose to love about herself that were not supposed to exist, right? That's one of her definitions of survival. I am not supposed to exist, but I do. So I wanted, with this form, there's 58 chapters. If you read one of them, I'm happy. I consider them to be 58 ways for you to encounter Audre Lorde with the intimacy that I experience, but also there's a wholeness in each of them. So that it's not, we're looking, I'm like, is this a quantum diorama, this decoration in this room? That it really is something that honors the fact of what life is. And Audre Lorde believed that life was not something that was being lived separately by one person, right? You remembered that in your dedication. You are not one linear being, so when you encounter this, it has to be open enough to invite you, the version of you that I can never predict, and that you might not even be able to predict between the time it takes for you to listen to me say read it and for you to actually read whatever page you open up to, you know? So I wanted it to be participatory in that way, and it meant that I had to not only destabilize the form of what people think is happening when they're reading a biography, which maybe is like just consuming information about another life, but to understand it's not another life, it's your life that you're encountering. And I have to move out of the way, and I have to move the colonizing form out of the way in order to just let that energy flow through. That's the way I approached it.
Similarly, I gain acceptance in doing this project by refusing, right? Refusing form, but not ignoring it, right? As a rhetorician, as a person who studies rhetoric and so on, I wanted to engage beyond the notion of persuasion. So when people think about rhetoric, they're thinking about, well, you know, who says what to whom, under what circumstances, and to what effect, right? It's a very neat and packaged kind of thing that couches rhetoric and rhetorical activity within making an argument and either persuading or failing to persuade, right? What I try to do is go beyond persuasion to think about what it means to be as a fundamentally Caribbean existential phenomenon, right? So form, I recognized, couldn't adequately provide me with the things that I was asking of it. Now, it may very well be that I lack the facility with form to be able to do these things, right? But I wanted to, it could just be my insecurities, like, maybe you're terrible, right? Maybe you suck, but...
None of us agree. We do not approve this message. We do not endorse that statement.
But the reason, thanks, you know, but the reason I was thinking about it is because I know that I'm deliberately moving away from form, right? But I'm also moving in it and moving through it. I know that my desire to tell a Caribbean story in a Caribbean way meant that all the different tributaries that make up Caribbeanness, right, on a genealogical level, biological level, and an atmospheric level, spatial level, all of these fall within the province of what I think I have access to, whether or not I'm able to articulate it, right? So I'm looking for and looking through all of those different traces that help make me who I am, that help make me understand the Caribbean and Caribbean stories. And it allows me to tell a Caribbean story in a Caribbean way, right? To mix genres deliberately, beyond the desire to make an argument. Here is what Caribbeanness is. That is not my concern, right? My concern is using form and what I call the dissipation of form, right, which is ultimately what I'm gesturing toward, the dissipation of form to make space. This is what I think a rhetorician should do. This is what I think a Caribbean rhetorician should do, especially because there aren't very many of us, right? And the fact that we exist and inhabit other spaces, right, almost as immigrants disciplinarily, right, engaging in aspects of art, engaging in aspects of literature, engaging in aspects of music, etc., and engaging within the different genres and traditions that make up those different spaces is, to me, a quintessence, right? It is quintessentially Caribbean. You know, we have this saying where anywhere you go, you see, you're bound to bounce up a trini, right? But I extend that because everywhere I go, I bound to bounce up somebody from the Caribbean, right? Anyway, no matter where I go, right? And we everywhere, we in everything. And we are, in fact, like salt. You know, that kind of way, like sugar. And to produce a book that not just honored that or pointed to that and say, hey, we in everything, but to perform the being in everythingness, right? To write a book, to produce a project, to shoot an image, to sculpt an object, meant that I was embodying that sense of Caribbeanness, right, in a very deliberate way, right? And in a way that is not, I don't got, you know, I'm not fighting with history, I'm not quarreling with history in the way Glissant does, right? But I am embracing that opacity and obscurity and reveling in it, you know? Because this, I think, is how we see each other better in these spaces that we make for each other, the possibilities that we make for each other to exist. So the dissipation of form is what I'm attempting to accomplish. And that involves the embrace of form, which is sometimes a little bit difficult, right? But it's a part of the necessary process, I think, for what will eventually become a book that challenges what form looks like or is supposed to be, or what discipline looks like or is supposed to be. I hope that.
Most definitely. Apologize. My allergies are going haywire. I mean, I think both of these books are really excellent examples of Black diaspora invention. And they really sit in that place for me. That's why I was interested in hearing you, both of you, speak about form. You know, as a reader of the books, one of the things that immediately drew my attention was the accents in the title, or what I'm going to call the accents in the title. And maybe I land on the wrong notes in these titles, but I'm hoping that you will say something to us about two words from your titles that I land on. So, Alexis, for you, it was survival and eternal. And Kevin, for you, it was arrival and sense. And I'm wondering if you can say something to us about what did it mean to come to that grammar, that language, in the titles of these works, and what might they do? You don't have to give us expectation or intention, but what might they do for us as readers engaged in these works? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. You want to go first? All right. So, good question, Rinaldo. For me, when High Mass, the book before this, I was at an interview and someone said, "So what's next?" Right? And High Mass like just dropped. And like, "So what's next?" And it's like, you've never interviewed a writer, have you? Because I have not been able to answer that question for 7 years. Right? Not only did I not know, but I could only, I could only sense something happening, you see. I could only imagine something happening. And I troubled myself over the past few years to think of what would it mean to articulate a sense, right? What does it mean to articulate the inarticulable? What does it mean to speak the unspeakable? What does it mean to image the imagined, right? Just the imaginary and the unimaginable as well. And to do that, one would have to inhabit this area of the sensory, right? One is not doing as much as one is wanting something to happen, desiring for something to happen, feeling something about to happen, or maybe feeling it and missing it when it has happened. So I set myself on that idea, right? Knowing that as far as my artistic process goes, I'm never going to satisfactorily get there, you know? So in many ways, this book is intensely personal because I'm thinking about my own limitations, right? I'm thinking about what prevents me from getting there. And those things are time and space, my mortality, lack of funds, lack of resources, right? my body breaking up, breaking down, right? So thinking of what that means, right, and trying to get there is sort of, to me, better than trying, like actually getting there and saying, well, I reached by, yeah, so I'm book done, book end done, book never done, you know. Even now, this project is revising itself. I'm revising it, engaging with others. It's making living work, right? So in terms of trying to not necessarily make sense of sense, right? I don't want to sound, kind of ridiculous about it, but rather to find language for that, right? Knowing that, I remember Elizabeth Nunez had said to me that writers write not from fullness, but from the lack of it, And she didn't even know where that quote came from. And I've been using it now for about 35 years, right? Writers write not from fullness, but from the lack of it. And the lack of fullness is something that I embraced in doing this work. Because sense is a lack of the fullness of what arrival, the experience of arrival, could be, right? The sense of it is what I'm looking at. An arrival that may never occur. An arrival that for you might occur, but for me is still in process, right? And that we're all still part of that process, of course, in an organic way, but I feel like to sense it makes it a little bit more precarious, but also safer to navigate instead of the surety of a sense, surety of an arrival that I do not actually know.
Same. But honestly, I really relate to this idea that we are moving with an impulse and trusting an impulse without knowing what the outcome will be. Audre Lorde has a poem called Call, and she says, we are learning by heart what has never been taught. And that learning by heart is not the memorization of what exists. That learning by heart is the presence of what it is to be transformed by the moment that we're in, right? That sensuous experience and sensory experience, which for Audre Lorde, who, unlike our beloved Olive Senior, did not have a democratic view of what poetry was or could be, she was like, if it causes that sensory transformation, there should be a physiological difference in the reader of the poem, wherever they're reading the poem. If that doesn't happen, it wasn't poetry. That's how she felt. She had a very high standard. That was how she taught her students, who have been my teachers. So this idea of the eternal and survival, it's like they're not supposed to be together, right? There's a contradiction in the ways that we understand this idea of the eternal, the vast, the everything, and survival, which we've understood in a very scarce way, right? Like just getting enough, right? And having to, and this has been an intergenerational narrative, having to make decisions that supposedly ignore the eternal in favor of just reaching the next moment, right? This has been a parenting narrative for at least one person in the room. Maybe I'm the only one who has faced this contradiction at home. But what Audre Lorde meant by survival was not that. She was talking about a form of presence that is so present that it's infinite. She was talking about a form of being that's non-individualistic, such that it reaches everywhere. So when she would say things like, this work did not begin with me and it does not end with me, she was talking about this energy. Sometimes she talked about a fund of energy. She was like, when I die, my energy is just gonna go back into the fund of energy, right? And that was how she understood her life as eternal. Not because she had a lot of longevity. She didn't. She only lived to be 58 years old. Not because she knew what the future would hold or what the answers would be to the questions. In her poem, Black Studies, she says she can imagine her students saying, "Mother, soon we will not need you. Only your memory teaching us questions." You know, she knows that she can't make this claim on the future, but what she says is, my words will be there. And that's a particular type of promise that's not about dominating the idea. It's not about colonizing the future through your own hopeful, great ideas that you have right now in the present. It's about being present in a way that's so shareable that it doesn't exclude the possibility of whoever it is that's coming. And so, you know, it was, I mean, and it was a thing. You know, even when I was interviewing Audre Lorde's people for this book, they were like, is this a religious book? Like, eternal life, you know, eternal life has been used in religion in a particular way, right? So I wanted to bring it, you know, I do that, right? I'm a Black feminist love evangelist, so I do that. To take the religious terminology, to take the supposedly profoundly secular terminology of survival and to say, for Audre Lorde, this is the same thing, which means that possibility, right, the creative power of difference is operating in the relationship between those terms, and it gets to operate in the way that we relate to what it means to engage Audre Lorde for each of us in the particular moments that we're in now or that we will be in.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that both of you, in brilliant and different ways, take those 4 words and reanimate them for us as readers in truly surprising ways. So, you know, the way in which you think you work with Audre's engagement with the natural sciences across her life from childhood really animates this idea of the eternal in ways that are outside the religious but deeply spiritual. And so that was, for me as a reader, surprising. And Kevin, similarly, you know, the way in which you continually apprehend arrival, but then in the footnotes, your engagement with Kamal Brathwaite and the arrivants really opens up another aporia for thinking about this long progression of a certain sensing of Caribbeanness that we remain in. And so, you know, I'm thinking about 2 other moments that animate both of these books. Audre Lorde was a trained librarian, as you remind us in the book, and she was in some ways deliberate about how she might be remembered. She brought that practice into archiving her papers. And I'm wondering if both of you might reflect on notions of the archive and photographs in both of these books. Because both the archive, an idea of the archive, a practice of the archive, a restricted notion of the archive, and an expansive notion of the archive grounds these books. And relatedly, both of these books are pedagogical, not in a restricted way, in the use of the photograph to add another texture and density to the storytelling. Can you reflect on those for us?
My turn to go first? Okay, so, I think she's saying sign language to you.
Time? Okay, yeah, we're coming.
So Audre Lorde, yes. Audre Lorde was a library scientist. She, I don't know. I mean, I'm excited about the questions. I could say a lot about the archive. I have a whole chapter about the archive and being in the archive and opening a box, and Audre Lorde's hair is filling this box, which I've touched before I realized that I'm holding a box of hair because it was not labeled box of hair. Anyway, and this is this is something that transformed the way that, first of all, my direct experience in the archive. I was the first person to visit Audre Lorde's archives, and really brought me back into an embodied question about what it means to have your hair as part of an archive. She had shaved her head. She had these beautiful gray locks. It was her conversation with the Guyanese poet Andaye, who was also surviving cancer, and they had a deep intimacy about what does it mean to have bodily autonomy? What does it mean to have control over your beauty, your desirableness, your sexuality, your sensuality as you're treating cancer and living with cancer? And so she kept her hair until the moment that she was like, I'm taking it all so it can actually be together as its own archive of my movement through embodiment. So there's a lot that I have to say about those types of remains, that way of remaining. Audre Lorde's politics of hair, which also have an intergenerational battle inside of them, as do my own politics of hair have an intergenerational battle in my family. But I'll say that Audre Lorde's relationship to the archive, and then those who have insisted that she persists through the archive, brings us back to this question of what remains and what hair as the actual afterlife of our skin has to teach us about what it means to be in relationship beyond and within mortality.
Speaking of mortality, we are all archives in the making, right? At least this is what I believe. I believe that our stories are archives in the making. The secrets that we share are archives in the making. The material archives, not just in terms of our skin as we break down into dust, but my mother's hair. For a number of years, I would shave my mom's hair, shave her head, and maybe about 6 years ago, I photographed her just after shaving her head, right? So I created this series of portraits that are in the book of me just shaving her head and saying, hey, mommy, let me photograph you. And she said, all right, no problem. But then her hair became part of one of these sculptures in the work, right? So in thinking about how literally the different parts of us, the different parts of our bodies, the different stories that we carry in our bodies, how they are transmitted outward, it becomes this active treatment of the archive as a living object, right? As an object that is in many ways, many different ways alive. Which is to say, when you're engaging with the archive, it's not this unilateral kind of conversation. It's not a one-sided thing where you kind of just saying what you want the archive to be, you know? Yeah, I'm trying to see if I could impose a particular narrative on this archive to suit my own research purposes or critical inquiry or whatever. It's bilateral. The archive is speaking back to you. Sometimes it feels like inspiration. Other times it feels like haunting. Sometimes it feels like exhilaration. My goodness, what a find. Other times it feels like terror. Oh my God, what a find. As in, what have I found? What to make of what I have found? When the story of this particular archive, you recognize, which my pause reason, you recognize that it is beyond you, not just temporally, not just spatially, not just narrativistically, right? It is just beyond you. And your engagement with it is then always going to be limited. You're never going to be enough. You are never going to be enough, right? And the recognition, the acknowledgement of that never going to be enough, that fundamental inadequacy, becomes in and of itself an opportunity for you to embrace your own mortality. To know that you are going to die, but don't frighten. It's just your breathing body saying, remember Spirit, remember Bone and Nail, remember. So my treatment with the archive comes all the way through genealogically to lead to this really expansive, impossibly, articulable situation that makes the work that I do live in a way that I couldn't do it if I were to infuse it with all the breath that I have, even though I have tried, So I feel like that is, yeah.
Maybe we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for such an interesting conversation. Alexis, I have a question for you about your research. And with such a vast archive, what was your process, and what was it that you chose to put in, and more importantly, what did you choose to leave out? Because I think that's always the harder choice.
My process. So, where to even begin? So it's been now almost 20 years since I first started researching in Audre Lorde's archive. I didn't have the idea I was going to write a biography. I have an eternal relationship to Audre Lorde. But I was writing my dissertation when I took that first visit. I consider it to be sacred work, to work with the items of people who have passed away. So I would say that my archival process is a process of ceremony, it's reverence, it's surrender. I feel like it's almost an initiation each time. So I've visited her archives multiple times. My process then becomes immersive. So that relationship with the archive is one aspect of the immersion. The fact of Audre Lorde's students being my teachers, mentors, guides, chosen family, people in my life is another form of immersion. The fact that every day I read poetry by Audre Lorde to this very day is a form of immersion. And then the interviews, and then all of that process is happening. And because it's happening really from this desire that I have, right? That I didn't meet Audre Lorde in this embodied form that she was in, and yet I must be with her. That's what I know. That's what is causing all of this to happen. Without knowing it, I'm attracting all her people to be in my life before I even know, and then I later find out, oh yeah, I was in Audre Lorde's poetry class, and I'm like, what? That means, right, trust your impulse without knowing why it's happening. So then, to be then in this ceremony and to understand I have what I need, even if what I need is more questions, it then becomes this process of understanding what belongs with what. Understanding that Audre Lorde's relationship with her mother and the life of the underground volcano Kikimjeni, they belong together in this particular way, right? With the excerpt that I read to you, it's saying, oh, that thing that her daughter said that day 10 years ago when I was listening to her, it goes right here. It almost felt like making a collage or something like that in terms of the decisions that you're talking about. It's a listening for a resonance that is emergent, and is still emerging, right? What to leave out then is decided by the story that wants to reach, and it was very important for me not to, because you can't fit everything I know about Audre Lorde in this book, right? Or all the books, It's obsession is obsession. So that's just what it is. And I do think that it's important to this practice of openness, this practice of breath, which is saying that this is not about me proving that I can tell you a zillion facts about Audre Lorde. It doesn't matter if you ever think I'm an expert on Audre Lorde. This is about the energy that needs to move through and be with you at this time. And there, for some reason, in the question of what's involved in the ceremony, yes, the volcano, yes, the uranium isotopes, yes, these things that she said about her mother at this time, yes, this extract from this poem, these are the things that should sit with you when you sit with Audre in this, from this angle. So it is deeply intuitive. My process is deeply intuitive, and those decisions are guided by me trusting that relationship.
Yeah, I would have to. Yeah, I'd have to agree, like 100% with that. You have to surrender yourself to the work, and that is what I have been trying to do for the past number of years. Right, surrender myself to the work, surrender myself to what, and a lot of writers in here would recognize that, where they're surrendering themselves to the work. Yes, we are still subject to the form of letters on a line, on a page. We are still subject to our relationship with editors that, will help us bring shape and form to things. And, all of those things are true, but I feel like there has to be a releasing of what you think is control over what you think you want to do. It's not that the narrative is going to just kind of like take you in some chaotic direction. It's going to go where it has to go. I was having a conversation the other day about what water wants to do. And part of my argument is that water, as Morrison said, is always kind of like trying to find its way home. Water is single-minded in that way, trying to find its way home. Every stop, therefore, is temporary, But to surrender and to move out of the way, move out of your own way, and witness what is taking place. Take note of what is happening. Take a breath. Situate yourself in and around the entire process, and you will realize things, like realize as in things becoming real, but also becoming, discernible. You begin to see in ways that you had not been seeing. You begin to feel what you might have forgotten you could feel. And possibility then becomes probability, because by paying attention to what is possible, you raise the probability of expressing what you think is happening. It was never a case for me that I was trying to tell the entire story of Arrival. That would be absurd, And I'm already navigating abstraction here, right? But if I'm thinking about what is perfect about this project, it's the idea of perfect fugitivity, Apprehending Arrival is to be in perfect fugitivity, because we're thinking about something that cannot be acquired fully. But it's not running because it has to escape. It's not in flight because it's trying to get away, because it's in threat, And I don't have to catch it. And I don't have to catch everything that I catch, right? Wherever the intersections occur between all these many, many threads that make up my own senses of arrival are there primarily as an invitation for us to participate, for us to make intersections, for us to cross paths, for us to have conversations, or not, and to sort of just think about what it means to be here, right? So the vastness of the archive, for me, is not the point, right? Trying to encompass that, right? It may just be enough for me to say that this archive is vast. This archive is too vast for me or any of us to properly navigate, right? And then failing all of that, you stop, you take a step back, and you let your reflection on the work resonate. Because that resonance that you allow to happen will lead to your thinking and the possibility of more work emerging.
Other questions?
Thank you. Yes, there. You were talking about the materiality of the archive and the sacredness of being with the things of people who've passed. I deal with a lot with people who are archiving in digital space, partially as a way of securing this information, this archive, against future loss. What has been your experience if over the time you've worked with these archives, you've had to also deal with digital archives, or what do you imagine might be differences, pros and cons, moving away from that material experience with the archive to having to access this information digitally?
Thank you for that question, Kelly, and thank you for coming materially and not just digitally this morning. Kelly was like, I might have to catch you on the live stream, y'all. It was a late night, so I appreciate that. And I think that's a great question. I wrote a lot of this book during quarantine, and the archivist at Spelman, for example, sent me a lot of things digitally that I needed to look at again when they were closed, right? And a lot of different archives sent me things digitally that I'm so grateful, for the possibility of that. I listened to digital recordings of Audre Lorde. I'm writing about June Jordan and Fannie Lou Hamer right now. I listened to them. The reality is the energy, and the energy is not limited by format. There is a difference between an analog record of Audre Lorde reading her poems and a digital stream of her reading her poems. There are analog records, check that out, from phonograph records. But at the same time, this is what I mean by eternal, is that we're talking about an unstoppable energy. And the question is, how are we reorienting? How does the ceremony change in order to honor that reality? And so yeah, this isn't a really good pro and con list of digital versus material. Of course it's different, but there's also something different about accessing the information in a space that has my artifacts. It has my copy of Audre Lorde's memorial service program. It's a space I've been reading her every morning. It's a space where I've been honoring my own ancestors, and now I'm digitally accessing the work there. It also adds something that's not necessarily the case when I'm in a space that has to be very clinically preservative to honor and make sure the artifacts remain and don't fall apart. So I think that, of course, there are pros and cons to everything. What I'm responsible for is honoring the energetic reality of what it is to connect across death, across space, across time, across context, and that is sacred. It's also always happening and always possible. That's part of the reason of me being like, just say the name, right, of someone who's not in this room, just to remember that we actually know how to connect beyond and across space, time, in some cases, depending on who you dedicate it to, even life and death. We know that. When we remember that and practice accordingly, right, that resonance that Kevin was speaking of just a moment ago, I think that that's the priority. So what does it mean for somebody like you, Kelly, to be involved not only in the ceremony that I encounter as a researcher, accessing archives in the different ways that I access archives, but participating in the actual ceremony of what it is to offer those archives, right? Honoring that same energy. And I would love to continue to be in conversation around that, but to me, we can't let ourselves off the hook in any way. And I know that the impulse to digitize is coming from that same impulse that holds sacred what is actually sacred.
Yes, 100%. I could just say 100% because it's easier. But that said, I feel too that there is something deeply exciting about the impermanence of the archive, even if it's the digital archive we're dealing with as well, right? You know, in changing formats, you know, thinking about storage space, thinking about the kind of energy, the kind of power that it takes to run these archives, imbues the life of the archive with a certain level of impermanence that, for me, is in some ways worrying, because you're thinking also about what are you going to do with the archive before you change it, and how does the format and that kind of stuff limit what is possible for the archive. You know, do we have time to do it? Do we have the resources to make those shifts before these things become obsolete? But then I feel like we're also faced with an opportunity to think of method as well as philosophy, the philosophy of the archive, what the archive means, you know, what does memory mean? And this is not an answer to what to do in the face of obsolescence. I don't know, right? But what I try to do is find ways to maybe to compensate or to exist within the interstices, right? The spaces in between, the cracks, as a way to help navigate what I know is inevitable, even if it outlives me, right? The archives are going to outlive me. But knowing that there is an inevitability to the end of the archive, you know, means that we think constantly about how do we supplement and complement the stories, the work that the archives themselves do. And you're doing tremendous work digitally, you know, and have been doing for years, Kelly, and so many of us are now beginning to do that. I think to do that is to recognize implicitly the urgency of the search for an eternal aspect to what we understand as lives, as they exist in the archive, as they exist on the page, as they exist in the image, right? And how our perfect fugitivity of those things enables us to do better, deeper, harder, more beautiful, more terrifying work. Beautiful, dangerous work.
Yeah, I mean, I if I may take 10 seconds, I mean, one of the things about the beauty of these two books is that these two books don't only draw on and from and rub up against the traditional archive, but these books are archives themselves in their refusal of form. You guys have offered us another way to think about the encounter with words, with object, with other books, with people, photographs. So these texts are doing something more than the traditional archive can do. And they offer a different kind of resonance and reverence for that which has passed. So I'm thinking about some of the photographs in your book, Kevin, of your sculptures that incorporate your grandfather's tools. That's an archive. I'm thinking about the places in some of that work where you hide sugar, right? And I'm thinking about this other archive of inheritance that both of these books really sit heavily on. And I'm wondering if both of you might say something in relationship to inheritance and ancestors about the kind of spirituality that informed these two works, especially and importantly about Yemoja and where Yemoja shows up in both of these works. And then we'll come back to the audience and it might be time to conclude.
They're like, it's already time to go. Okay, so.
Yeah, they're like, how long this panel is?
when my grandmother, Lydia Gumbs, died, I understood that our conversation was not over. And I worked with her objects. I worked with her mirrors. I worked with her passports. I worked with her purses. I wore her jewelry, and I still wear her jewelry. And I would say that's the spirituality that grounds this work, is the understanding that that was the first time that I had to actually act on what I knew, which was that I still need to be with people. The fact if they're living now, or they lived before, or they're dead, or they're alive, or they're far away, or they're close by, doesn't change the fact that my action must be in the service of what I know, which is that we can be together. So that's how I would describe the spirituality. That there's a lot of ways to describe that. Of course, there's lots of ways in African-based spirituality that are, in fact, methodologies for that exact being together. But that's, I think, the briefest way I can say what the spirituality is undergirding this book.
This book was intended to be experienced in a couple of ways. It was intended to be experienced read aloud, right? So I wrote it to be read aloud, but I also wrote it to be experienced with the artwork that I designed with it and for it, and that it demanded that I produce in the way that I produced it.
Can you all please also go see Kevin's exhibit, A Sense of Arrival, at Medulla Gallery? It's really close by, and you should go experience it. It's still up right now. Yes.
So
You weren't gonna say?
I forget. I forget. A history of bad choices means that my memory is not as good as it should be. So I was just forgetting sometimes. But so much of this book, and to your question, Rachel, I don't know if you're still there.
She gone.
All right. So the question about sort of like how do you archive and how much you do and that kind of stuff. So much of this work is about what I think I understand of Arrival, but a huge part of it is what I know I will not get to, because something is for sharing and something is not for sharing, right? You talk some, you keep some. So this is not a level of selectivity that an editor can teach you, right? This is knowing when you had a hush, right? And I know it's ironic, a professor saying this, but, knowing when to talk, time and place, right? And it's not the hush and let people like you, right? Not that kind of disciplining, but knowing that some things are to be kept secret. And there are moments of grace in this book where I bury lines from a poem in a window. I've forgotten the order in which I buried them, because it is an incantation that does a particular kind of work, but I transcribe and it's on the page so we can read it. There's an image of the poem written on the paper that I embedded in the window with, so you can see what I do. And as such, we understand that practice. She said 5 minutes, right? We understand that practice of sharing and withholding, not just as methodological, not just as the practice of nonfiction as a genre, but thinking of nonfiction as cultural embodied practice, right? Caribbeanness is a nonfiction, which is to say, we make it up constantly. It is not a fiction in that sense. We're making up what we know, finding ways to say it, ways to show it, and ways to not show it. Times to just be easy, you know what I mean? And to just kind of let things be, because nothing chasing you. That is the implicit argument. Nothing is chasing you. Your fugitivity is perfect, right? It is perfect, right? Which is then to say that it is an imagination and a practice of freedom, whether you feel it or not. it is going to happen. It has already happened. You know, that is what that sense of arrival is, right? It's not the corporeal form, it's not the archival form. It's no form at all.
One last question from the audience? If not, I have one for them. Go ahead.
So, greetings all.
Yeah, man, greetings.
So, I've been sitting here and haunted by the idea of freedom. It just gave me goosebumps thinking about it. And so I wanted to kind of just ask about how do you, as archivists, as extractors of the past, think about the notion of the same notion of being of freedom within while you are working and pulling things that seem to be quiet, but wanting to that you all want to find space for in the present space. Like, I know this is quite an abstract, ethereal question, but I feel like you led me there, and so now.
I think it's the same thing. I mean, what Kevin was just saying about the freedom to actually be guided by the experience of freedom, even if we're not experiencing it, right? So in the work, and so many people in here are doing that in their creativity, in their craft. There's a form of trusting what we know is possible and surrendering to it that is participating in what, in fact, we haven't been allowed to participate in, right? And so this is when I look at the sculptures in a sense of arrival, and you trusting your impulse, right, to transform these tools into another form where they cannot reproduce what they were created for. That's what we're doing as artists. What's the ceremony for me to, instead of reproducing what my colonized education has demanded of me and what capitalism is demanding of me, and all of that, how can I be in a posture of creativity and freedom that almost short circuits those impulses, which are wired in there, So when I say things like I'm getting out of the way, that's like I'm in a constant process of getting out of the way. Every encounter with the work, I'm also dealing with that part of my brain that's like, aren't you supposed to know? Don't you want them to think that you're smart? Don't you blah, 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 blah. Don't you want some white editor somewhere to understand this? And understanding that, I have to be like, okay, but why am I doing this? I'm doing this because somehow Audre's not supposed to exist, but she does. And I have to have that energy be what infuses me in the practice of creation. So that's what I think of when I hear your question about inside the work itself, what that accountability feels like.
Yeah, that's such a great response to a really great question, but time is up. No, hold on. I could theoretically try to answer it really quickly, because the light is blinding me, so I'm not sure if I saw time up or
a time to respond to the question.
2 more minutes, right? Suspension works in this book and in the exhibition very deliberately. There's suspension everywhere as an expression of sort of like our implicit and explicit subjection, right? But what I'm interested in here is the suspension of subjection. Not as torture, not in the methods that were used to kind of like break our bodies, using gravity against us, using our bodies against gravity in order to make us, to dehumanize every aspect of our being as we thought it to be or think it is. but rather to suspend the notion of subjection itself. So it is an abstract thing, right? And it's an abstract question that you ask because we are abstract beings, right? I reject the idea that Caribbeanness is purely practical, right? That it's just kind of like doing this kind of like straightforward kind of thing. No, right? Caribbeanness, in its essence, right, is this dissipation of form, and that is a contradictory expression in and of itself. So, where you want me to tell you if I can't figure out what a rival's supposed to be between the covers of a book? You don't want to tell me nothing. I could just say, well, yeah, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, for real. Yes, and that could be enough, because that profundity sets the tonal resonance for doing this work. So when I look at the hoe blade and the fork, the cutlass without its handle upturned, right? I'm not just saying no work, that work done. I'm saying that the notion of work is dissipated in this project. Now, I have worked to produce it, certainly, right? But that's just a transference of energy, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of navigating the archive digitally and materially. That's a transference of energy. What I have made is for you, right? And it's not a gift. It's yours, it's done yours, is your right. And all I'm doing is acting as a conduit to what is your right to inhabit, the space to be who we are as Caribbean people, which is immeasurable, necessarily. Immeasurable. No tool could make us Caribbean, no work, no practice, no genre could do it. So this is, I think, what I have attempted to do here, and what I've invited you to participate in with me.
I would say that the great Sylvia Wynter wrote 2 essays. The first was called A New Ceremony Must Be Found, and then 34 years later, she wrote Ceremony Found. And these 2 books inhabit that ceremony found. A new science of the word, a new way to think about what it means to be. So please join me in thanking Kevin Browne and Alexis Gumbs. And thank you for being here.